All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's 4 p.m. on June 28th, 2024, and I would like to welcome you, everyone in the room, and those participating online as I call to order this meeting of Bellbrook-Sugarcreek Board of Education for the purpose of conducting the school district's business. We value everyone's input and have made sure to dedicate a portion of this meeting to hear from you. We look forward to your comments during that time as indicated on the agenda. As you can see, Mr. Kinsey is not with us tonight, so you all have the B team. I am not as suave with the Roberts rules as he is, so we will fumble through this together, and Mr. Liming is going to keep me honest. So, Mr. Liming, will you please call the roll?
Mrs. Anderson?
Here.
Mrs. Dorn?
Here.
Mr. Kinsey's absent. Mr. Price?
Here.
And Dr. Pryor?
Present.
Okay, if you would all stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we're going to start things off with our primary purpose for having this non-traditionally scheduled meeting, which is the Treasurer's Report this afternoon.
So could I get a motion to approve the permanent appropriations for the 24-25 fiscal year as included with the agenda?
So moved. Second.
We have our permanent appropriation total, $41,408,325. The general fund portion of that is $35,247,450. This is an increase of about 5% over last year, mainly due to inflation and increases in things like the Greene County ESC services for our therapies and preschool and some new positions that we were required to add. This does not include federal grants. I add those as they are approved as the year goes along. So there are a lot more funds than we have listed here. We also do not budget or appropriate student activity accounts. So all of those aren't listed here. That's why the list is rather small. So any questions about any of these? They are not something that's set in stone. If at any point we need to change appropriations during the year, we can do so by board resolution. So.
Any questions? No? All right. Call the roll.
Mrs. Anderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Dr. Pryor?
Yes.
Could I get a motion to approve the blanket and super blanket purchase orders as listed with the agenda, and then I'll explain a little bit about what that means if you need it.
So moved. Second.
Okay, that was Pryor first. Okay, if you look with the agenda, we have a list of super blanket purchase orders, blanket purchase orders. I'm not really sure what the reasoning for requiring this by the state auditor's office is, other than maybe just to let the Board of Education know what the largest purchase orders are that we have out there. Most of these are, well, they all are either annual or quarterly. So, and they're estimates, of course. They want us to do an estimate at the beginning of the year and then adjust it as the year goes along. We realize it's not going to meet that or it's going to exceed that amount. They're mainly utilities, and we have the Sodexo food service catering. I have a little description below each one that tells what the difference is between the super blanket and blanket POs. And again, don't ask me why we have to do this, but here they are, and they have to be approved by the board prior to us issuing them to begin the fiscal year Monday. That's all I've got.
Which is why we always have to have a meeting right at the end of June.
Right.
But not at 8 o'clock in the morning, like we previously asked.
No, much better.
Thank you for that.
Yes. That's all.
Go ahead and call the roll, unless
Okay.
anyone has questions. No?
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Dr. Pryor?
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson? the 23-24 appropriations to balance them as presented with the agenda. This is, we just approved next year's. This is approving balancing this year that today's the last day of, for last work day of.
So moved. Second.
Keeping it easy for you here.
Okay, these are listed there on 2C, and these are the amendments, as I said. So the one big one is the general fund. If you look at the next to last column, it says today's date at the top. That's really what we're approving, is that column, the changes for this year. And the general fund is large, $850,000 amendment. That's basically for two reasons. One, I always start out appropriating a little conservatively, and if we have to, then increasing it at the end of the year. And two, about half of that amount, or maybe about $500,000, I think, so a little bit more than half, was for the school buses that we bought this year that I thought we were going to buy when I did the original budget. I thought we were going to buy from permanent improvement monies, and instead we used those for the track and new surface of the football field. So we spent these out of general fund, and I didn't have them appropriated at the beginning of the year. So it's just a movement of money to make the appropriations balance what we spent for the year. Any questions about it? The rest of these are federal and state grants, except for the $40,000 and $11,000 for lunchroom, and then principal's fund is an activity account. And our auditor looks at all these every year to make sure that we have not spent more money out of each one of these funds than we appropriated, and we haven't appropriated more than our beginning balance plus our revenues. So you can't appropriate more than you've got, and you can't spend more than you've appropriated. So it's a lot more difficult to do this little balancing dance than you would think because of all the funds we have and all the requirements.
I imagine it's difficult to cut everything off and stop time when there are always things pending and have happened and waiting to be invoiced and whatnot.
Definitely. It is, you wouldn't believe it.
I would actually. All right, anyone? All right, go ahead and call the roll, please.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Dr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
and Mrs. Dorn.
Yes.
And then the last one I have, I need a motion to, let me see how it's worded here. On my right spot. Okay, I need a motion to, still not in the right spot, sorry. Change the breakdown of the revenue from Bellbrook High School only, athletic participation fees. Currently, half of them, $150, goes to general fund and $150 to the athletic department. We'd like to change that to lower the general fund amount to $100 and increase the athletic department amount to $200. No increase in fees to students or anyone. It's just the breakdown is different. This is mainly because during the year of COVID, the athletic department really took a big hit in their balance because you got no gates to sporting events, and a lot of the expenditures still had to be made. So they lost a lot of money during that year and have been struggling a little bit. This will be giving them more of our general fund participation fee money if it's passed, and it's the easiest way to do it, we felt. And Mr. Odell's okay with this. I think Dr. Kozat agreed too. So.
I have no questions. Anyone?
Nope. Athletic department's very important.
And it does not affect middle school. It's just we're only doing this breakdown for the high school. It's what Charlie wanted to do it that way.
All right. Go ahead and call the roll,
I think we
please.
need a first and a second.
Oh, do we not get a first and
Oh,
second?
I think so.
I
So
thought-
moved. Second.
I thought
That's my
thought
fault.
he did when he read it.
That's my fault. I must have
See?
dove right into
B
it.
team here. B team. Mike would have caught that.
Okay, Dr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mr. Price.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to the correspondence section of our meeting. Did anyone receive any correspondence of note?
I have not
So, yes, I think we were, or at least I know, I received an email from the Loveland superintendent, and they've had an initiative within their community to address, is this coming out okay? I'm kind of far away from my mic, but to address the school funding of districts that are similar to ours. And there's about 50-some districts throughout the state that are very similar to us, as in, getting over 70% of their financing for their schools locally from property taxes, that don't have a income tax. And so there's some 50 schools, and Centerville's having that. You've seen where they've had several levy failures of late. Loveland has struggled enormously. And so what they did, which I thought was commendable, and what I'd like to see happen in our own community, was they have stood up a community-based committee, which made up, I believe, of senior citizens, business experts, financial experts, business people, mom and dad having kids, working and trying to pay their property taxes and all that, and to try to brainstorm solutions to how to come up with, how do you deal with the situation when the state thinks, or at least treats you as being affluent, but not everybody in your district is affluent. So it's the same old song that's been going on for years here and throughout, apparently, and obviously in other districts. So Tuesday I participated in they invited folks from, on the school board and in the administration to participate, and it was really interesting. And they formulated a good plan on the way forward, and one of the things they're looking at is, if you look at, for example, our what they call our guarantee funding. If this district received funds from the state based on the formula, we would get even less than about the 6.2 million or so we get right from the state. Based on the formula, we'd even get less than that. And so they have, the formula would give us less. So other districts are similar to that, where you're getting a guaranteed funding, but it gets no adjustments whatsoever. So if you look at our 5-year forecast, you'll see like a flat line of 6.2 million for years and years and years. And so one of the proposals is that would get an inflationary adjustment every year. That's just one, it's not the solution. It would give a district like ours maybe, I don't know, maybe an extra $140,000 a year on a $41 million budget. So it's not that significant, but there's no one single solution to any of this. So what is extremely, I guess, positive or exciting about this is that a district similar to ours is working to get a conglomerate, if you want to call that, of similar districts to basically start formulating a plan, talking to the state, interacting with the Fair School Funding Plan people, et cetera. So there's more to follow on this, and I really would like to see our community stand up and somebody in our community, work on this. We have, of course, the Superintendent's Financial Advisory Committee, but we meet, twice a year, and it's just for an hour or so. That's not going to be sufficient. There needs to be a more grassroots and pervasive effort across our community, because sooner or later, those levies are going to come back, and it'd be nice if we can at least demonstrate to the community we have done everything possible, to avoid or delay those. And so anyhow, I would hope, again, somebody in the community will hold up their hand and say, yes, I'd like to lead a committee on that, and if so, I can help connect the dots on working with Loveland and other. And they seem to be the lead in this effort. So anyhow,
Thanks,
that's
Kevin.
pretty much it.
I joined as well, and so I guess to piggyback that a little bit, Loveland has identified 53 districts who, like us, are on the guarantee, who are not on the funding floor and don't have that income tax. So 53 out of 610 districts in the state. So 1/12 of the districts. If we band together, we still don't have a ton of voice, but at least it's 1/12. Whereas the other 11/12ths are all pretty happy right now, for the most part, because they were helped significantly with the recent Fair School Funding Plan. And so this is kind of like the 1/12 who weren't helped, and giving us a voice to help. Can you tweak that a little bit, or can you remember us, please, and amend that in a way that would help the 1/12 of us that you left behind? So, any more to come on that, but I think it's prudent that we remain involved as a member of that committee, and if Mr. Price is willing to be our delegate to that committee, I think that's probably appropriate.
I just really appreciate that they recognized they had a problem, and from grassroots within the community, people stood up. 50 people which you say that's too many, have an effective committee, but at least you got cheerleaders maybe, 8 or 10 people that are really actually doing something and 40 people rooting them on. But I would like to see something like that happen within our own community, because it's just a real problem. If a child or a parent chooses to send their child to a private school these days, because of school choice, they'll get $8,400 for a high school student, and about $6,700, I think it is, for before high school. But yet, when we look at what we get from the state, it has nothing to do with the number of students. They just go, here's your $6 million, and whether we have our 2,500 students or 5,000, it doesn't matter. And so there are serious problems in our state funding model, and change has to start somewhere. So I'm, again, quite appreciative for what Loveland is doing. So that's all.
Thanks, Kevin. That's great. Anyone else have correspondence? All right, moving on with reports to the board. Ms. Gann is going to present as the Director of Curriculum on our new ELA, potential new ELA curriculum and potential adoption.
Thank you. We've been busy this year. There's a lot going on. You talked about recent budget bill and legislation, and that's definitely impacted our work, so I'm going to brief you on that and try not to go too deep into the weeds, but I'm here to share with you the decisions that we have made as a committee and recommend to you K-12 adoption of new English language arts curriculum that meets that legislative requirement and will provide us with just great materials for the classroom. I did bring samples with me, but that is not an exhaustive group of the sample materials. We do have a lot more over at central office. It was just kind of impossible for me to bring it all over here today with limited time and limited muscle. So I do have something for all 4 buildings represented here today. First thing I want to do, though, is thank the committee members. We had a big group that met. I want to read their names and thank them publicly here. And these are in no particular order, but these are the teachers and administrators and a support person that came in and helped us with this important work through the year, joined us for all the meetings and the training, helped me facilitate meetings, etc. So we have Amy Brewer, Patrick Barker, Amy Klepaz, Danielle Schaff, Dinah Layfeld, Donnie Phelps, Eddie Lone, Holly Mothersole, Ginger Keaton, Jamie Burnham, Jenna Hill, Katie Bills-Tenney, Michaela Andrade, Paige Rose, Rebecca Campbell, and Rebecca Campbell was a literacy coach at Stephen Bell. You met her in May. She co-presented with Stephen Bell personnel. Sarah Jettinghoff, Shelley Smith, Tate Ackley, and Rebecca Conley. Rebecca worked with me on facilitation and helped give us firsthand information directly from the state. She is a literacy supervisor at Montgomery County ESC. Bethany Burgess, Dave Hand, Debbie Schwederman, Jennifer McClure, and Molly Nisley, Pam Sizemore, and Belinda Butel-Herman. So all of those folks joined me several times during the year and were highly collaborative and very helpful, experts in their field for sure. Oh, power. He even gave me a hint. All right, now we've got it working, thank you. All right, the rationale. Why are we adopting K-12 English language arts materials now? I already mentioned legislation. It's no secret that we've been working hard on the science of reading, this research that's been around for a long, long time, since the 60s, but it has certainly made quite a resurgence for good reason. We know that it works, and if we teach using those principles, we will see better outcomes with student reading abilities. So we were also very overdue for an adoption K-12. Historically, and I've talked about this in the past, we made building level or even grade level decisions for curriculum adoption. So we did have a lot of disjointed curriculum, and it's taken us a long time to get to this point where we could really make a nice vertical decision. And legislation has certainly pushed us in that direction as well, but I think it will be a very good thing for students and staff to have that vertical articulation with one philosophy, and that's science of reading and evidence-based practices. This also will complete the big 5 of reading in K2, You heard a lot about that from the Stephen Bell team as well. This should be a refresher, maybe a different graphic for you, but those big 5 areas of reading instruction are there on the graphic. And that circle that surrounds the 4 in the middle are really what we're talking about for addition at K2 at Stephen Bell. So I'll talk more about that when I get into the curriculum a little bit deeper. But we know that if we teach the 4 in the middle, fluency, vocabulary, phonemic awareness, and phonics very explicitly, then that should lead to comprehension of reading materials if we provide students with rich text that they can connect to that is on grade level, and we stop leveling students because we need to provide all the supports, all of those skills that are in the middle of the section there, in the middle of the circle rather, so that they can access those rich grade level text and therefore learn a lot more about the subject they're reading about, whether it's science, history, anything in particular, or even understanding the novels that they read. I'm going to skip that video. The English Language Arts Adoption Committee work, we launched that a little late in the school year, January 23rd, because we were waiting on this approved curriculum list that was promised to us, and finally, after winter break, we said we can't wait anymore. The legislation is here, we have to choose something, but we don't have the list yet, but they kept promising it, so we thought, let's go ahead and kick things off with the committee and do some of our professional development. And during that time, together with Rebecca Conley leading that from the Montgomery County ESC, we established a vision and the core beliefs. What do we want in our ELA instruction? What do we believe all students here in Bellbrook should be entitled to in the classroom? And what are the outcomes that we want? And we really landed around student growth. Wherever the students are, we want them moving forward. Our highest achieving students and students that struggle in reading. 100% of our students deserve that, and 100% of the students should be able to achieve some levels of growth. So in February, we reconvened and we went deeper into our professional development, learning more about what makes a high quality instructional material in English language arts. And we used definitions and training materials from the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, ODEW now, and learned a lot about that from Rebecca, who is sitting at the table with the State Department, bringing that information back to us. This is something that will transcend to other content areas as well that certainly will start to appear in other areas. We may not have as much legislation in terms of what we choose, but we will certainly have to follow processes that are very similar to this. We also learned a lot about Ed Reports, and Ed Reports is available online. And this is where you can look at different curricula that is published by vendors. Not everything is reviewed by Ed Reports, but ODEW used Ed Reports. It's considered the most objective nonprofit group out there looking at quality curriculum, or looking at all curriculum rather, judging quality on lots of different areas. So we dug into those areas. They call them gateways. So we got into those, and teachers really learned how are they rating curriculum to end up on the approved list, so that we can really understand that and not just trust. Then in April, in the morning we got together and we did an activity where each building group got together and did an inventory. What are you currently using right now because you recognize that you had a gap in your current curriculum? So what kinds of supplements do you use? What kinds of online things did you ask your principal to buy or me to buy over the years from curriculum money? What kinds of supplements were you using with students, whether it's one teacher or a whole grade level, because you didn't have that particular topic covered in some kind of high quality instructional material that you've now learned about? So we came up with some pretty long lists, and frankly, just a lot of money being spent on supplements. So We wanted to make sure that we were looking at that so that we have those ideas in mind. We had a gap in vocabulary, for example, vocabulary instruction at certain grade levels because we didn't have materials for that. So we have a supplemental vocabulary program. Maybe we had gaps in grammar in a program or what have you, writing, etc. So we had to fill that gap because it was important to kids. So keeping that in mind, talk to the vendors of the approved curriculum in the afternoon of April 23rd. We want to see, what are you doing with vocabulary? What are you doing with grammar? What are you doing with writing? We don't want to go into the curriculum and then a year later say, hey, Betsy, this is not as good as we thought it was going to be. We need to buy something else. So no curriculum is perfect, and I'm not saying that won't happen, but we will be using data to make those decisions in the future, and we will look at all students and not just, you know, one particular grade level here and there wanting something. So it'll just be more systematized, and we're not saying that that can't happen. We want people to have what they need. Supplements will probably always exist, but we just want to be more thoughtful and systematic about it. So that afternoon on April 23rd, we visited Montgomery County ESC where they hosted a vendor fair because everyone in Ohio is going through this process, whether it's right now or they've already gone through it in the spring or they're going through it this fall. Everyone has to adopt some kind of approved curriculum. So these vendor fairs are popping up. So I appreciate that service where we could meet and talk to vendors under one roof and not have to schedule those and pull teachers out at different times. So that was a very good experience. Then on May 7th, the 20th, and 21st, because of the time of year, if you think about what's going on in schools in March and April between spring break and then going right into spring testing and then into the year activities, it was very difficult it was impossible for me to pull that entire committee, all those names that I read, to pull them together after April 23rd. It wasn't really fair. We didn't have enough subs that time of year. And state testing certainly is a priority to make sure our teachers are available for all of that. So I had individual building meetings on those dates. On the 21st, covering 2 buildings. So that was our wrap-up meeting where we made our final decisions. Final decisions as far as our recommendations to you were pretty solid prior to those meetings because there really aren't that many things to choose from when it comes down to it. We also had public review, as you're all aware, and we've posted on social media. We invite the public to come in and take a look at the materials that I'll be proposing tonight. And those were held on June 20th and June 24th. We had 3 people attend and board members, and that was a great experience for me in particular to talk with parents, not just about here's what we have to offer and here's what we've done with looking at ELA materials, but just talking about school stuff, getting some feedback on just different things, and a couple things I'm going to follow up on that have nothing to do with English language arts. Nothing major, but just good conversation with parents, and I don't have as many opportunities to do that, so I really appreciated the people that did come in and take time for that, and I enjoyed it. So I mentioned a little bit about the historic adoption process being a little more building centered. Did I skip a slide? No. Okay. And we typically wouldn't have all these outside kind of pressures, I guess. That's why I created this graphic. And I don't mean pressure in a negative way. I think it's really been positive. It's pressure because it's new, and you have to accommodate for that. But you have a historic adoption process where all the people on the list that I read to you would get together, we'd make a decision, and we would have probably been here in April, perhaps, proposing something. We wouldn't have had a list of approved curriculum. But with the legislation, we had several things happening there. We had dyslexia screening that occurred. We gave all kids, grades K1, 2, and 3, a screening for dyslexia as part of that big language arts or reading legislation. And then another part of legislation that really isn't discussed a lot is the previously we have created reading improvement and monitoring plans where students that weren't performing at a certain benchmark had intervention with a documented plan that is required by law. That has been extended beyond grade 3. So that is new to us. We obviously provide intervention, but documenting things and really making sure that A, we're following guidelines with evidence-based practices and specific kinds of programs that are on a newly approved list for intervention versus core curriculum. I'm not going to get into the intervention programs today because that's not really the purpose, but we have a lot of things to really plan for and make sure that we are in compliance with. However, the good news is for the intervention programs, we have lots of great things in place that showed up on the list, including people that have been highly trained in those programs. We also have a district goal, as you all know about, around systems and processes. So as part of putting together and implementing systems and processes that are thoughtful, data-driven, and documented, we've learned a lot about implementation science and the research around that and how to get those processes in place and take on initiatives that are sustainable. So about mid-year, with our training and implementation science, we said, let's try to apply some of these new things that we've learned with this literacy process, with the ELA adoption. So that train had left the station, so to speak, and then we were training with implementation science, so we merged some of those processes together in a soft kind of way, but I think in a very good way to help us learn some things there. Basically, we start with data. What's the need? And standardize the process. And these are the two key points that I think are going to be the biggest change for the better in years 2 and 3. Ensure support and monitor implementation. So in the past, with curriculum adoption, and traditionally, I would say most everywhere, you go through this very thoughtful year-long process to choose curriculum, and then it's approved. In year 1, you get implementation, launch training, and maybe a follow-up, and everybody should be good to go. And then you move on to math, or whatever the case may be, and you repeat the process. And sometimes that original subject area kind of gets forgotten, like, oh, it's going fine. This ensures that it stays on the priority list for me, for professional development, for all the administrators and the teacher leaders that have been at the table helping select the materials. We're going to keep an eye on that. We're going to continue to collect data. And by data in year 1, I mean, what are we doing? How's our pacing going? How effective is the training? Those kinds of things that help me as a teacher do it well. What kind of staff development do I need after you've taught me the initial stuff? I've taught it for 6 weeks, now I need this. I didn't know I needed that at the beginning. So that kind of circular feedback to help us continually adjust. That will happen in a written plan in years 1, 2, and 3. And I think that's going to be a great thing that will just keep getting repeated regardless of the initiative, not even curriculum. It can be anything in particular that we're putting in place. I think of like PBIS, positive behavior intervention support. If that legislation were brand new now, this would be something that we would document and make sure that we had this implementation plan for 2 or 3 years. And then the science of reading, we've all heard a lot about. So the dyslexia training requirements are separate from the dyslexia screening. So you know that all of our K through 3 teachers completed 18 hours of staff development that was required by law. They participated all last year and a little bit toward the end of the prior year in staff development every PD day that we had with follow-up to online modules. So it took up a lot of their time on staff development days, and they completed those 18 hours. Now we get round 2. So they've completed that, K through 3. They also need to complete structured literacy requirements, but a shorter course compared to the rest of the teachers. But 100% of our staff, not just English language arts teachers, but art teachers, math teachers, the band director, everyone, myself, Dr. Kozad, all of our administrators, we all have to complete a pathway that lines up with our job. The good news is that teachers, if you are teaching in a classroom, you will get a stipend paid by ODEW. That money comes from ODEW, goes through the treasurer's office, and will be paid to the teacher. So Kevin and I, they've worked out a good plan, I think, for stipend payments. I've added that to documentation I've sent out to teachers so they'll know when they get their stipends in relation to when they complete their training. And they have until June 30th of 2025 to complete that. And it is high quality training, I will say that.
Is that all self-paced, Betsy, or is that going to chew up more professional development days, or they get to do that on their own?
That's a great question. That will not chew up any professional development days because of really ethics rules. We can't provide a stipend, or ODE can't provide a stipend if you get work time, contracted, paid time to complete it. That would be like a double dip, I guess. So it's on your own time. That's why they get a stipend. They did not get a stipend.
It's not an unfunded mandate. It's like
It's a
at least
flow
a
through.
partially funded mandate, kind of.
It's funded.
It's funded.
It's-
That
the
one
stipend
is.
The stipend.
Yeah.
Yes, so they did have to do it on
But
their
not
own
all
time.
the work that you've like done to do all this,
No.
to implement all of it. And things
Right.
like that, yeah.
Right,
The
and that was
individual
during the
gets
day.
stuff.
Yeah, that was definitely contracted time. However, I will say that people review materials on their own. I've talked to teachers, including one today, that was online looking more deeply at some of the curriculum online. A lot of people, we all do that. So, but this is, I think, really good news that finally there is something, and I think it's a fair dollar amount. It ranges from $400 to $1,200, depending on the length of your course.
And it's good quality training. I just did it.
You've participated?
I just
Yeah.
finished it. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good things
It's
about
good.
it.
You can't click through it. You have to go through each thing. I mean, it's locked down pretty well.
Yeah.
That's good.
Quality videos and presentations,
We have
and I
different-
think
we have different definitions of good online training.
This is decent.
It's
I mean,
getting
I've done a lot,
better.
and it's
Yeah.
decent. It's decent.
online training is getting a lot better, I
Yeah,
think.
the stuff is good.
Yeah, we have quite a few people. I think yesterday I checked the spreadsheet. People were turning things in. Like, we have 24 people that completed it already. That's a lot. I thought, because they still have until June of next summer. All right. And I've covered this, but just to kind of drive it home, the implementation will look like this. Year one, we're almost at the end. At the end of this meeting, we'll be at the end. Our professional learning happened this year, phase one, just learning about the process, the new rules with ODEW, and doing all our research and making decisions. Phase two, like year two of the process, but year one of implementation in the classroom, training, implementing the curriculum, monitoring that. How's it going? How's the pacing going compared to what the book says? Is this really a week-long activity or lesson, or did it really take longer with the student population you serve? And checking in with each other and having time during those staff development days to do that. And then providing that support, making that commitment on our staff development days to give teachers time for more formal training and informal training. We've talked about observations. We're going to do some partnerships with other districts that are either in year two or beyond of some of the curriculum, or also in their first year, like us, and look for opportunities to share cost on staff development in the future. I've already talked to one district about that. And also sort of that peer-to-peer observation that we've talked about here as part of our district goals, but taking that outside the district. We've done that in the past. Stephen Bell teachers went to a few other districts back when we were considering foundations, watched it in action, really got a much better feel for what it looked like with students. And seeing kids respond to the curriculum is so different than just reviewing materials. So, and also talking with the teachers. How did you do that? Or did you have to pivot with this particular lesson? So we're building that in certainly this year, and that can go on as long as we need that. And then phase 3 would look the same, that second year of implementation, third year of, quote, adoption. And the support would look different. The monitoring, we're predicting in our district implementation team, kind of a prediction, and we're still young in that team, still learning, but that monitoring would be more like, let's get into student data. Now, what's happening? Are we doing better in certain areas? Are students performing higher? Are they reading better as a result of this, et cetera? Not that we don't look at student data all the time, but I mean in terms of a real formal judgment against the curriculum. We always review student data as a reflective practice of our teaching quality, but I'm just talking about in the formality of this kind of plan. And so I've already mentioned the district implementation team. This is just a graphic that's kind of a draft that gives you a sense of how these teams will operate. And the ELA adoption team, our English language arts adoption team, is in the center. And those are all the people I read at the beginning. Their work together as a big decision-making body and a group of professional learners is ending, but their work as far as implementation and certainly leading their colleagues is not ending. They will go back to their building implementation teams and be that go-to person. And in some buildings, we already have ELA teams established from years ago. They're the go-to people when we're planning something new or reflecting on how something's working, kind of that liaison between building leadership teams and the teacher-based teams. So just tweaking the language and adding some responsibilities, mostly in the areas of data collection. And by that I mean, how many of you are finished with Unit 4? When are we giving the Unit 5 tests? Those kinds of things, so we can really judge our pacing and implementation. Are we doing what we all said we'd do and being good stewards of this financial commitment that we made? This is all subject to change as we learn more about the roles and responsibilities when we go deeper into that implementation science training. And that I've already summarized. Those leaders will help me. I'm excited about that, supporting that new curriculum, that data collection I mentioned, and they'll be the liaison, sharing the needs and helping me with training decisions. Our teacher-based teams will remain in existence as well. I think that wraps it up. Actually, I think if you refresh, Henry, we should see a list of all the curriculum. If you just refresh the whole slideshow. I thought something looked funny. There it is. I'm not sure the slide number, but I can identify it here quick. That's what I thought. I knew I had some slides I was deleting. That's all right. Yeah, if you go to 13, we'll be good. Thanks for being flexible. And I'm sorry, that was a different file.
I made a copy yesterday, and I thought I brought it.
Okay, that's all right. Did everyone get that on record through the mic? No. That's all right. We can pivot. All right, so the proposal is, and you do have a copy, like I try to do I call it a one-pager summary of everything, trying to squeeze it on one page. I don't know if I made it or not with this adoption since it's K-12. But for K-2, Wit and Wisdom, it's called Wit and Wisdom Core Curriculum. The core curriculum is intentionally called core versus comprehensive because in K2, you've got those segmented areas for instruction, those explicit phonics, phonemic awareness, those areas that you saw in the circular graphic. So I'll talk more about that in another graphic that I'm going to have you go back to in a second, Henry. 3.5 is wit and wisdom comprehensive. So really excited that K5 students will hear the same kinds of language in terms of the way English language arts is presented and organized. There's an instructional model that's like 5 or 6 stages, they call it, and that will be very similar in both buildings. So students transitioning from Stephen Bell going to Bell Creek, those 3rd grade teachers will be like, oh, they already understand the model, as opposed to now when you have a new instructional model. I'm going to take you back a couple slides, if you would, Henry. Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay. A couple of people asked me about the foundations factor. Didn't we just adopt ELA? Why are we doing this? Did we waste that money? No, we had to have that. They call that a foundational skills program you can see in the first column. This is copied directly from ODEW's approved curriculum list. For the K2 grade band, if you go there, public site, you can see there are 2 programs available to us. We are required, if you see the highlighted area, we must have both the core English language arts and foundational skills. Our foundational skills program is foundations. That's why I had the slip there. So we were kind of a little bit backwards here. The words on the chart for ODEW said, if you have the core and no foundational skills, then this is what you need to do. We were the opposite. We had the foundational skills, but no core. So that's why we partially met the expectations, and we are pairing what we have with a core program from the approved list. There were 2 available, and Wit and Wisdom is completely aligned to foundations, geodes, and makes sense for the instructional model at Stephen Bell because they're aligned. They can teach from all those curricula that they already have and add this layer, which is not going to be an easy feat. I recognize that. It's adding something to their plate. But at least the systems for instruction talk to each other and depend on each other, as opposed to the other one approved curriculum, which is very independent of what we already have. And getting those to align, for example, if I'm teaching a particular phonics skill in foundations, but it doesn't align to the text that I'm teaching in the core program that's come up, and these kids don't have those phonics skills yet to be able to decode these words, that would be a pretty significant problem for instruction, and frankly, waste of money. So Wit and Wisdom is the choice there.
Can I interrupt though? Like,
Yeah.
There's like 2 choices. Wit
2
and Wisdom
choices.
And one other choice
Yes.
that didn't align with the funding.
Yes, the other choice is called Fish Tank. I'm sure it's great, and if we were starting from scratch,
Right.
that would have been fully vetted, but it doesn't align to what we already have in place that's on the approved list. Okay, now, thank you so much, Henry. I'll jump back to the proposal. So for grades 6 through 8 for the middle school, we've been using My Perspectives for years, and so we want to continue that and just upgrade it. So one thing that our teachers really like about that is there is an optional grammar workbook for students. We are going to have that grammar workbook. It is a consumable, And so with our package, that we get a shipment every May or June that comes directly to the middle school, and so we'll have those ready to go for the kids. It's a combination of electronic and hard copy. So that is the program that we are proposing. So really not a big lift as far as training. I'm sure that the electronic features have changed some. We will have training. It will be on Monday, August 12th, and but it will be an upgrade, an update. And then for the high school, grades 9 through 12, 9 through 11 is really where the vendors spend their money creating. So that there wasn't really much to look at for 12, but the teachers did research, certainly. But 9 to 11, Into Literature by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, known as HMH. That is a comprehensive program, very similar to My Perspectives. And vertically, we don't predict any real issues with that. The units are organized very much the same. The big thing that they really liked about Into Literature versus My Perspectives was the balance of literature and informational text, so fiction, nonfiction. Some of the companies are going so heavy into nonfiction that it just kind of takes away some of what they feel is very important in terms of balance. So, and they can definitely do a great job with this curriculum. It looks good. And it's rated all green on Ed Reports, as is My Perspectives. And English 12, even though they did research to see if there was anything they needed, they frankly just do not need a textbook adoption at this time. We've reviewed all of the units and their needs, and they're in good shape. They have what they need to teach that course and teach it well. Those would be students not taking AP courses. And then the last two I have to propose are for AP Literature and Composition and AP Language and Comp. So one primary textbook, one supplement for each. And I don't have to read those to you. The second bullet under each course, those are like handbooks. They're paperbacks. And those, going ahead with those AP will keep us within that 10-year required cycle for AP course materials that we've talked about before. That's a requirement with College Board. Now, I think I'm ready for that, the questions. And I appreciate that you've asked some already.
Betsy, you may have previously discussed this, and I may have just missed it, or it may even today, but could you talk a little bit about what Ed Reports is? I mean, it's a website. Is it unique to Ohio? Is it across the country? Or
Consumer reports for curriculum, is that what it is?
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
It is.
They use a lot of experts, and they have a lot of real teachers in the field and retired, but English language arts experts in this particular case, reviewing using a vetting process that is heavily researched for validity in terms of the way they rank and rate different products. They break down lots of features of textbook programs and provide a ranking, and it's either did not meet, partially meets, or fully meets expectations. So one example could be, and we could go to that website if you want to see it, or you could check it out. It's edreports.org. One simple one is just, does it align to the standards? And they really dig into very specific, standards and come up with a rating. Like really get into the weeds as far as the words and the verbs. What do kids have to do with the standard? And then they look at the assessments that the vendor has created and say, well, the standard says they need to be able to explain, but the vendor's not really asking them to explain. They're just asking them multiple choice questions or that kind of thing, so that we don't have to do as much of that detailed work. We still do, but it still gives us a real good high-level look at those things. Another really big area that people are looking at is text complexity because of the shift from guided reading, leveled reading, or, providing so much differentiation in our classrooms that students who are reading below grade level only have access to below grade level text. So the research has shown that they're just not showing the growth when they're only provided with that, where what we should do and what the research tells us to do is you provide them with rich text that they can connect to, because the video I skipped is really good, but it's a study about, we take a group of low readers who know a lot about baseball, and we have high readers that don't know anything about baseball. And we give them all the same article. And then we test them on baseball. And the kids that performed significantly better were not the high readers. They were the low readers that knew a lot about baseball. So through that process, the kids learn how to read better because they're really interested in the book. So when we hear things like high interest books, we stop there with the conversation, but that's why, because it really does improve our actual reading skills and our ability to stick with it and use those phonics skills that we've been learning and apply them, because I really want to know about this, whether it's history or animals, and so giving kids choices around those things and providing a bunch of different topics to kids in language arts is so important, not just what I'm passionate about as a teacher. And that's why they're requiring us to do the core program, like what we're proposing for K2, because that's giving us these libraries for teachers that have all these different books on all kinds of topics. And I've heard teachers even say that have taught it, like, there's a book about this particular historical event. I don't know. Or buffaloes was one thing that someone talked to me about recently. Like, I didn't think the kids were going to be interested in buffaloes, and they loved it because in Ohio, they know nothing about buffaloes because we don't have buffaloes around here. So they learned a lot. They were applying skills they were learning in their class because they were so intrigued by that. So I'm simplifying that quite a bit, but I've learned a lot through that process, and I don't want to imply that we leave low readers behind. There are skills that we as teachers have in our bag of tricks to help students that are struggling readers access rich text, and that's where my skill with differentiation and providing tools and read alouds and paired readings and assigning just sections and then talking about it and writing about it. There are so many things that we do so that kids can actually access higher level text, and they're learning more about the topic they're reading about, and they're also learning the grade level skills. So I'm excited to see what student data looks like, especially for our struggling learners in the future.
Betsy, one maybe bigger picture question would be,
Sure.
so this came down as, State of Ohio said you can pick, whatever, I guess these two. Are there other ones coming that I'm not remembering right now? Are there other subjects where, like, curriculum used to be local choice and now it's local choice-ish?
Right.
Not really?
Right, exactly.
Like, is that the way everything's going?
There's a lot of rumor around math, and everything I've heard is that there are groups of people math people that want a piece of this pie, like, well, there's science of math too. I don't know what that looks like as a former math teacher. I have my suspicion. We have standards that are the skills, and then we have these other standards called standards for mathematical practices, where we use tools for precision, and we explain our reasoning. Softer skills, they're not like solve fractions and those pure mathematical skills, but they're other SMPs, and our teachers use those all the time, but they're embedded in the pure math teaching. I think if they do something, it'll be around that. But we have access to all that now. They are part of the Ohio math standards now. They're tested, but they can't be tested in isolation. You can't just have a test question on a math OST, Ohio State test, that tests you on your use of a tool, but they can give you a math question, number lines, for example, in 4th grade, and expect you to use your mouse and manipulate that number line and come up with equivalent fractions on a second number line using a tool for precision. So that's, I'm no expert, these are the kinds of curriculum geek conversations that are happening, trying to predict, but I don't think there's anything proposed unless Doug has heard something
There's nothing
different.
proposed, but it's going to come.
You think
It will
it'll
come.
definitely
Yeah,
come?
I think it will definitely come.
All right. Get ready. You ready,
I think that is
Jennifer?
next, maybe next couple of years. I
Okay.
think it is coming.
All right.
I mean, just strategically looking at that, because I think the worst case is kind of like we pick something and like whatever, I don't know, what's next? What big subject is next? Math? Is that
Well,
next for
math
us?
was going to be, but
Oh,
But now that we're waiting on the dust to settle with this, because it wouldn't be wise for us to go into it this coming year if, Doug's got
something's,
more firsthand knowledge that it's coming, and then we could be in a pickle like a district about 7 miles from us that spent millions of dollars on curriculum right before this legislation came out. So, for ELA. So I think the wise thing to do is to hang tight. And I know math teachers have been excited to see math on the horizon, but the data, if we're using implementation science principles, our math scores are really strong. I don't think it's urgent. I think we have some other urgent needs, but they're smaller subject areas. I think our world language people have been waiting patiently. But I'm at the beginning of those conversations to see how or should we revise that calendar.
yeah, and that's kind of the direction I was thinking in, that it would be horrible to implement a big strategic
It
change.
is, yeah.
And they come down with, I mean, it's one thing if they say you have to implement this within the next 7 years, or they give you some runway, but
Right.
it doesn't sound like they didn't give any runway at all, which seems,
Yeah.
I don't know, what do I know?
No, you're
okay.
exactly right. You're exactly right. It's hard to predict exactly. Just like us kind of putting it off until we finally had that meeting in January, like, it's coming. They say we have to use an approved program, but we don't know what the approved programs are, but we have a law that says we have to implement science of reading this coming school year. So let's at least learn some stuff before the list comes out.
And how long does a typical adoption like this last for? Like how long are the books good for?
That's a good question. I'm proposing a 6-year adoption. That's typical.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Betsy, for your
Thank you.
expertise.
Thank you.
Really valued.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for doing all those curriculum nights where people could come look.
Thank
It
you.
was really good.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Thanks for coming to it. You want this off?
All right, so we're moving on to open communication period. You're on. I'm going to do my best to channel my inner Kinsey here, so here we go. Your thoughts and comments are very welcome during this time. When given the floor, please share your name, address, and any affiliation you hold if relevant. You will then have 5 minutes for your comments, which should be directed toward the presiding officer, who, unfortunately for all of you, tonight is me. This time is for the board to listen and absorb. As such, traditionally, a dialogue is not created in this moment. In case you're wondering, the reason for these policies can be read in their entirety on the district's website, and policy 169.91 is to ensure that as many people as possible have the opportunity to speak and that everyone is treated equally and fairly. And I read all of that and no one signed up, so
Can I say one thing?
sure.
But you don't have to.
Take the floor, or take the mic.
I didn't sign up.
You're a regular now, you know the procedure.
Well, that's why I should have signed up.
Elise Thomason, 4024 Locust Bend, 45440. I just wanted to exige again how wonderful it would be if we could help our military families. I first showed you that there were cracks that were falling through that weren't being helped with free lunch. And I showed that with data from food insecurity in military. And I've been in touch with Mike Turner's office because he's been really good about that too, but it would be really swell. So food poverty and food insecurity has the best data, and that's often where a lot of our support comes, is when they qualify for that, but it's not catching that. I also showed you guys that Texas is beating us in education, which is lame. And they already have full-day kindergarten for everyone, but they have pre-K. And they discovered that military families were the same at risk as foster kids, homeless kids, and it would be a heck of an investment and give really good outcomes. So we can use that data as well. Finally, if we can't get everyone, so Texas gives all military, but if we can't get everyone, there are ways through the DoD to discern who needs it most. By rank, we could do a referral from first sergeants, a referral from school liaison, a referral from our MFLAC. There are lots of things that we can use that way. And I thought of another idea, because solutions are way better than fighting, and that's just not what I do. We get federal funds, which I would have been interested in seeing and hearing about, Mr. Lyman, from DC, not depending on how many military families there are, but how many military families fill a form. And when I was doing final forms just last week, there's a little checkbox, are you military affiliated? So we can just pull the data easily for how many military families there are. And if we need these military families to fill out forms to get as much money as we can really show that we really care about our military families by having this. And at kindergarten registration, we can have that form right there. And maybe what we could do, because the Department of Education says school districts can use that money for anything they want, not just military families, which, okay, if you trust teachers, you got to trust teachers. Okay. What if we use the kindergarten money coming in and apply that to military families and their full-day kindergarten? I saw that Russia visited North Korea. Like it's not just a doing the right thing and standing by our word. It's also a matter of military readiness, that families are safe, because we're about to see some fun things happening, pretty fun things happening. So I just want to exige that again, share my idea. The last thing I want to say is, Dr. Kazad, would you be so kind as to sign the paper so that my dog and I can go to the transportation office and insurance is turned on? Ms. Lori is in it. Most importantly, Miss Bo, the secretary, would like it. And for us to come, because I think one thing we're missing. No, I'm going to tell a quick story. I'm in graduate school for phonology, which is how sounds go together. First test, 98% of the grade. What is the secretary's name? It's Christine. It's Hawaii, so Auntie Christine. But the fact that education isn't just facts, but it's also acknowledging everyone, including you all, that works at it, I thought that was really cool. And for many of our students, the first brush with our school district every day and the last contact with our school district every day are our school bus drivers. And if you ever want to hang out with Ms. Lori and all this stuff that they do to support our students, I got goosebumps. So I was just wondering if we could do that, because they really want it, and it's something I can do besides bring cookies every now and again to really say thank you. So
Something we can follow up on later time.
yes.
Okay.
Good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, let's see. Next up, we have the superintendent's report.
Okay. All right, so we're going to do a consent agenda, A, B, and C. So A, certificated licensed employment resignation, leave of absence, supplemental duty. And then B is support staff employment resignation, leave of absence, consent agenda. And then C, central office employment resignation leave of absence. So need a first and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Again, so we have a few resignations on here. Again, a few teachers, and then also our high school and middle school band director, and then also Mr. Phelps, our BCI principal. So we say good luck to all those folks. They will definitely be missed. And then also, we are still really in hiring season here. We thought we were out of hiring season, but we are still in hiring season, and so we have continued to hire quality people, and so we have quite a few folks there that are just fantastic additions to the school district, and so we welcome them. And then also the same thing in the support staff, continue to hire those special needs assistants. We had 7 openings a few weeks ago or a month ago, and so we continue to fill those, and it's hope we can fill those by the end of the summer. So that's just a quick overview a high-level overview of those areas.
That's good news that we're starting to fill those holes anyhow.
Yes.
Mostly filling those.
Yes. We have
Anyone have
about
questions?
2 holes to be filled left at this point.
You keep filling them and they keep opening.
Yeah, I
different
know, I
ones.
know, I know. So we gotta, but we're getting quality people. That's key. So we're getting high-quality people.
All right, would you please call the roll?
Yep.
Mrs. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Dr. Pryor.
Yes.
Next is food service amendments. I recommend approval of the 24-25 amendment to the current 5-year contract with Sodexo Services to provide lunchroom services.
So moved.
Second.
Administratively very smooth for you tonight.
Yes. So this is just a yearly update where we essentially, change the dates and also update the amounts of the fees and so forth. But we are, for the first time in quite a few years, increasing by 25% our lunch prices. It's been quite a few years. I would say 5 or 6 years probably since we've increased our lunch prices, and as everybody knows, our food prices have gone up dramatically. So they've tried to keep them as low as possible, but it's time to increase those a little bit. And on a side note, Mrs. Hain, who's been our food service director probably 20 years or so, she has resigned and taken another position up in the Canton, Cleveland area, kind of an upgrade or move up the chain a little bit. She's now a general manager over a lot of school districts, so she does a fantastic job, has done a fantastic job, so good luck to her, but that's just kind of a side note to this thing.
Just a point of
Yes.
clarification, I think you said we're increasing lunch prices 25%, and I think
25
you meant to
cents.
said
Yes.
25 cents.
Not
I was doing the
25%.
math too. I'm like,
I'm sorry.
Wow.
I know what
Did I
you
say
meant.
25%? I'm
You
sorry, I
did.
apologize.
And I just wanted
25
to make sure
cents.
that we were clear that
25 cents.
that would be
Math
a
test
Not
here.
percent.
different. Got it.
Yes,
25 cents. Okay, got it.
thank you. That's it.
All right. Anyone? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Dorn,
Yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Dr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson.
Yes.
Okay. Resolution passes. Next is textbook adoption for ELA. Recommend approval of the following English language arts textbooks for the English language arts for students in grades K to 11, effective with the 24-25 school year. And you see the summary document there that is essentially based on, obviously, the presentation from Mrs. Gann from earlier in the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Mixing it up.
Sorry.
It was weird this time, we've previously adopted like one book at a time, and I spent tons of time looking at it, and this was so many books. Like I spent like 8 hours looking into these books and made the tiniest dent, and I know probably no one's read them all, and Googling, you can find some controversial stuff about some of it. I just hope that, our teachers read everything before they give it to a student, and if anything needs tweaked or something, then we handle that, because none of us could possibly read all that we're approving and spending a lot of money on, so. I read a lot.
There were a few things that jumped out to me that I really liked, though, and I will say, and I discussed this with Ms. Gann before the meeting, that there's a kind of a returned focus, at least in part, on grammar. I think that has been missing. It's missing in my own children, I will admit. So I like the return to some traditional, just grammar, like plain grammar instruction. And I do like that the third grade transition in my family has been the hardest transition in a number of ways, and so I like that at least that piece will be a little more smooth for those kids, because that's a toughie. So I was pleased with that. Yeah.
And I've looked at ELA curriculums for 26 years, and so this is probably some of the best stuff I've seen as far as genre selections, the different opportunities to interact with stories, and the differentiated instruction is there, so it's one of the better ones I've ever seen.
Anyone else? All right, please call the roll.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Dr. Pryor?
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Again, thank you to Mrs. Gann and for the leadership in that area, a lot of hours and work and time and effort of putting all that together, and leadership in that area of that committee also. So appreciate your leadership in that area. Thank you. You're welcome. All right, next is legal counsel. Recommend approval of Rebecca Princehorn of Bricker Graydon as board school district legal counsel for the privately funded high school weight room building project.
So moved.
Second.
And so as I talked with our own school attorney, she thought it would be wise to have someone that was more of an expert in this area, and she recommended Ms. Princehorn for someone to be able to make sure that as we do this, we do it right and we do what we're supposed to do, and making sure that we have an expert and an attorney that is specializing in just this area. So this is just for that area. It's not for anything else, but just thought it would be prudent to be able to do that, so we'll to get that, make sure we got all of our T's crossed and our I's dotted.
And that's a cost that will be to the district
That will be.
or part of the project. Okay.
That will be to the district.
Okay.
All right, please call the roll.
Dr. Pryor?
Yes.
Mrs. Anderson?
Yes.
Mrs. Dorn?
Yes.
Mr. Price?
Yes.
Next is policy changes draft, first draft. We've had some conversation at the last meeting about handbooks and about the policy, and there was a disconnect between what was in the handbooks and what was in the policy, and also probably what was in ORC. So trying to streamline those things. So tonight, thought it'd be prudent to just focus on the policy and make sure the policy is solid, and then as that is solid, we will then come back in the July meeting and finalize those handbooks. And so the changes for this particular policy is, again, of trying to delineate kind of what those medical excuses are and what goes towards those 65 absences for the excessive absence threshold. Again, the 65 hours is the mandated time. So as you see in the first read, we are striking the whole paragraph about medical excuses that will not count towards a student's excessive absence hours. But we are adding, and you see in the green there, all absences except those excused by a doctor's note will accumulate towards the 65-hour excessive absence threshold. So essentially, we have three categories: medically excused absences, kind of parent excused absences or excused absences, and unexcused absences. So your unexcused absence or your parent excused absences and your unexcused absences, those will count towards that 65-hour threshold. If I go to the doctor, I have a note from the doctor, that is not going to count towards that 65-hour threshold. So that's what the policy is stating, and so if that then is between this meeting and next meeting, if that is then approved in the next meeting, of then also having those handbooks at the next meeting, mirroring that particular language in the handbooks. And actually in the handbooks, it's would only be a few changes in there, and more or less just clarifiers of what's in the handbook, but also of taking out in the handbook about the 10 medically excused absences without a doctor's note, of taking that out. That is complicates the meaning or the explanation of it. So we are just going by the hours and so forth. So again, this is just a first read for tonight, and we'll then be on the second read for the July 11th.
I have a few things to say. So I totally understand wanting that policy. I personally like the current board policy a lot. It gives students some extra sick days without having to have a doctor's note. You know, kids get sick and parents don't take them to the doctor for everything. It's expensive. I've had kids too sick to even go to the doctor. So, you know, I want our students to be able to stay home when they're sick and contagious. And of course, we want our kids to come to school as much as possible, but I don't want to do things that make it more difficult for parents to be responsible and keep their sick kids home. Now, you know, right now, this is the policy. I'm not trying to change the policy. It's been in place for 4 years, and it has, you know, it says a parent can call the kid in sick 10 times before it starts counting towards their 65 hours. And so I double-checked, you know, Ohio Revised Code 3321.191 says, you know, a student can miss up to 65 hours of school per year, and after that they're labeled excessively absent. And at excessively absent, the school sends out a letter telling the parents they're excessively absent, and they can, you know, implement some sort of intervention if the school sees fit. But it says in that revised code that medical absences are not supposed to count. And so I contacted the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce this week and talked to them, and I said, okay, so medically excused absences are not supposed to count. Does the law require a doctor's note for a medically excused absence? And they said no. Administrative Code 3301-69-02 says a written statement from a physician may be required, you know, if deemed appropriate. And so they emailed me what their, you know, summary, which I am just passing out to you so you guys have it. They say excessive absent hours should not include medically excused absences, and that each school district should define what medically excused absence means, what qualifies, and how families collaborate with the schools. The doctor note is one way, but it's not required. Some districts set a limit to the number of times a family can call off a student without a note, and after that threshold begin requiring one. So that's exactly what our current board policy does. It gives them some extra days, because they don't actually want, you know, a bunch of students flagged as excessively absent when they had the flu. They really want to know who's skipping school for, you know, illegitimate reasons. So anyway, I like the board policy. I like to give parents and families that opportunity to have some more sick days. I also totally understand wanting everybody to come to school as much as possible. Lots of other schools have our exact policy. We're going to visit my niece and nephew tomorrow in Northeast Ohio. I looked at their school policy today. They have our same policy word for word. So we're not the only school who has that. But anyway, that's just something to think about, because that's, you know, as a mom whose first graders were sick quite a lot. It's amazing how many illnesses they can catch. So it certainly matters to me, but I also understand how you guys feel. But anyway, just wanted to put that out there so you have the information.
Just a few thoughts on that. So that trying to dig into this, the 10 days is a holdover from COVID. And so that was an extra kind of thing during COVID, because people were being quarantined and so forth and had a lot of other absences. So that piece is there. The other piece is, you're right, the ORC does not mandate that we have a written statement from a doctor, but the feedback from my administrators, my principals, is we would like that. We want them to be able to, for those to not count towards excessive absences, to be able to have that doctor's note. And so that's, even though it's not required, we may require we may require that. And so again, the 65 hours is about a day every 2 or so weeks of the school year that a student is absent, and they are, and it still wouldn't count, still wouldn't trigger the excessive absence letter. And so if they do have a letter or note from the doctor, it is not going towards that 65 hours. So as I get feedback from the administrators, they would, I think I can speak for them, that they're concerned that if we do not require the doctor's note, that our attendance, our absence rate will increase.
But I'm not trying to change the policy at all. This is what it's been for 4 years, so I don't really think it would increase.
Well, so the policy is one thing, so this was a holdover from COVID, and so the law says something different than actually our policy.
Well, our policy is perfectly fine with the law. I checked with the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. But I know, but it certainly can be changed. It's just, it's fine with the law now.
Can I clarify something
Sure.
maybe, or ask a question? So this excessive absence thing, what we're talking about here, and if a student hits 65, whether they have a doctor's note or not, the student hits this magical 65 hours number. What happens is their parents get a letter, and it requires our staff to engage with that family to potentially offer support,
Try to put a
see
plan
what's
together.
up,
Yeah.
see if we need to provide further intervention for a student. It's not that they're like punished or kicked out of school or retained in their grade. It's a trigger. And so even if a student has been sick for 10 days and they're, my kid's sick for 10 days over the course of a year, it gets to April, they hit their 10th day, it means that I'm going to get a letter, and my kid's principal probably is going to call me and say, hey, what's going on? Is there anything we can do to help? Is your kid able to keep up? Like, that's the big, thing that happens. It's not that anyone's getting held back or whatnot.
Honestly, it really only matters to the high school kids who are trying to keep their hours down. They have college visits and other things to do, and they want to be able to exempt their exam.
So that's an issue with the exam exemption policy. It's not an issue with
Well,
our excessive, the exception you're bringing up, or I think the rub is that the exam exemption policy is tied to the words excessive absence.
which is.
But
the
if
board's
this
issue.
policy's standing alone, do you take exception to this policy? Because I kind of like the idea, even if a kid has frequent migraines and stays home once every couple weeks because they do have that disorder, I like that there's, hey, someone's paying attention, as a trigger gets flipped, and our administrators are going to reach out to that family and make sure that, does that kid or that family need additional support? I'm okay with that. And this policy, as it reads, that's all that happens. So, but again, this is a first read, so we can
Correct.
continue to have
Yep.
these conversations, and we can each continue to have these conversations with Dr. Kozad or other administration, and we'll live to discuss another day, I guess. Unless, not that I'm closing discussion here, anyone else is willing to chime in.
No, and I know as a mom of 6, something flies through our house, it flies through our house. And if my kid has strep or the flu, they've gone to the doctor to get that positive test anyway. So that wouldn't count against them. And usually the doctor says cannot go back to school until you have this, and that would be covered under that doctor's note, right? Yeah. So I don't see a huge issue with the policy as presented. So
10 days is a lot.
it's a lot. And when they get out into the real world, their boss isn't going to take that. They have PTO, and we got to get these people prepared. Their mom can't send in a note to their job. We can try. It's not going to embarrass them, but So I think this is a lot. And I've not heard in a single time from anybody, even people who are a little concerned about this, that there's ever been an issue with our principals, being harsh. It's the opposite. I've heard grace and compassion, and so our principals are doing an outstanding job. when there's an issue that comes up, I think.
So just to be clear here, what's in red is what would be struck, and then what's in green is what would be added. So
Correct.
Essentially, okay. And then that specific sentence that would be added, all absences except those excused by doctor's note will accumulate towards the 65-hour excessive absence threshold. And your feedback from your administrators, from your principals, and throughout your administrators is they want this line. Is that-
Definitely.
Okay. Audrey, I like your observation that that is a trigger, you know, that, you know, if they just haven't, it's nice for us to know and just check on, because, I mean, we live in a pretty healthy district in every sense, but, you know, you never know. You might catch someone that's really got some issue going on there, you know, so. And it's not like they get, you know, turned into a pumpkin or something, you know, when they hit 65, right? I mean, there's this issue, of course, at high school with the exam exemption, but we can only exempt one exam anyhow, right? Isn't that the way it is? It's just one.
Except for seniors.
Seniors?
Spring quarter seniors get to exempt them all. Now,
Okay.
of course, that's Mr. Hand's policy. He could change it to no
Right.
exemptions, who knows, you know.
Okay.
But-
It's all, okay, I lost
Yeah.
track of that. So regardless, I mean, my thoughts are if this is what our administrators want, I'm supportive of what they want. You know, that's, because, I mean, they have to deal with it every day.
And again, this is first read, and so you can all ponder it, dig into it,
Yeah.
give Dr. Cozad a call, whatnot, over the course between now and when we'll vote on this, which will be our next meeting in July.
Right.
Correct?
Yep, so please give me feedback, because this will then impact, it will drive my changes to the handbook that will also be happening on July 11th.
I mean, I think for me personally, as long as it's clear in the handbook and it lines with board policy, I think you're good.
Okay.
In my personal, that's just me.
Anyone else have anything to bring up
So the
before?
principals were universal in their support for this insertion of language.
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else? All right, at this point, I'd like to move that we move into executive session for the purpose of considering the employment and compensation of a public employee per RC 121.22G1. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, we are now in executive session as of 5:36.
To vote on it.
Sorry, we have to vote. Man, I knew I'd mess something up.
Fire.
I was doing so good.
That's good.
Mrs.
Doing
Dorn,
so good. I vote yes.
Mr. Price,
Yes.
Dr. Pryor,
Yes.
and Mrs. Anderson.
Yes.
We are now in executive session as of 5:37. right, we are back. It is 6:17. We are out of executive session. Can I get a motion motion to adjourn?
Second.
So moved.
Yes. Third.
Moved by Dr. Pryor, seconded by Mr. Price. We are adjourned at 6:17.